Thank you, Jan, for this introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would try to pick up on what has been said by previous speakers on the topic. And my comments are titled as Success and Failure in Transition. It's exactly the question that has been raised in the previous session. Who is the best and who is the worst in transition? And actually, I'm trying to answer this question in my remarks. And you will see in one of the last slides my answer to this question. And we will be able to compare these answer with those answers that have been heard already this morning. The very big question is that what is success, what is failure, and what kind of transition might be called a success, what should be called a failure. For that, we definitely need to choose criteria to be used to judge what exactly success or failure. Which countries underwent successful transition, which not, and why? This is the most interesting and certainly debatable issue. Why some particular countries succeed and some others not? Generally, not exclusively, but generally, transition is understood in a very narrow sense as a transition economy, as a transition from essentially planned economy to a market economy. This is a very important element, and a lot of time, resources have been spent on discussing and implementing transition in economic sense. Only later it became evident that transition itself, from the very beginning, it's not, at least not for everybody, was clear that transition needs very substantial institutional changes. But nevertheless, even over this quarter of century, transition is very often considered to be institutional transition is very often considered to be an auxiliary element supporting, first of all, economic transition. I'd like to invite you to to make another step and just to look in transition in a much broader sense. As a transition from one distinct society to another distinct society that involves all or potentially almost all societal components, and all of them are subject to change. So in short, this is a transition from communist society, from communism to free society. If we look back a quarter century ago, and I will listen to the discussions and debates in former communist countries, whether it would be Central or Eastern Europe or former Soviet Union, people were talking about this coming back to normality. And this term has already been mentioned here. But what people meant by using this word normality or normality, a normal state or normal country, or sometimes civilized country. First of all, they had in mind prosperity. They thought about economic freedom. Some of them were thinking and even fighting for political rights, for civil liberties. More advanced people, not very many of them, were thinking that it would be impossible to achieve without rule of law. Some people pressed for national liberation, for those countries that was a part of empires. Very few people that time thought about external security, but many people thought about personal safety. I would mention some of these elements and components. Certainly, it's not the final list, but this is a very important list of the areas that would involve changes in societies. So that is why these areas would be private prosperity, economic system, legal system, political system, civil society, ethnic / national settlement, foreign policy and national security, ideology, personal safety. The old regime that has been inherited, or some at that time was present in all of those countries, could be characterized with very limited and low level of prosperity or sometimes real poverty. Economic system was centrally planned economy. Legal system was can be described as rule of one party. Political system was a communist dictatorship. Civil society was either suppressed or very embryonic. National settlement in many cases was a multi-ethnic empires. Some people thought about unjust borders between territories. Some of those countries did pursue policy of confrontation and aggression. Ideology was communist, supported by the state, and actually not only supported but promoted by the state, and personal safety was relatively low. What kind of a regime people were thinking about, or what were the goals and dreams? We can think about some kind of ideals, some goals in each of those areas. Private property, private prosperity, economic system, legal system. It would be certainly higher living standards, free market economy, rule of law, liberal democracy, free developed civil society, national liberation and national sovereignty, peace and cooperation with neighboring countries. In terms of ideology, no state ideology, free competition of ideas, and personal safety should be much higher. But between old regime and new regime lies transition. These two regimes are very different ones. And it was clear, at least for some people, that this transition could not be very easy and too short. There are some idealized images of so-called transitional success. Many people mentioned some names of some countries. More often, such countries have been mentioned like Sweden, Germany, United States. As organization, European Union, NATO. Much less has been said about OECD, but if we think about almost all members of European Union and NATO, with few exceptions, are members of OECD. And this organization actually represents this kind of the ideal from the point of view of institutional development. So I am taking this criteria of success in transition as a movement of societies of these countries from communist society to another one, to a free society, by closing gaps with the average of the OECD countries in each of those areas that have been mentioned. So, so that was called, at least was understood for many people as some kind of movement to a normal civilized country. But this transition, as I mentioned, could be different. It could be like some kind of very good bridge. It could be not very good bridge, but the person is still wearing helmet. In some other cases, it would be even much more scary. And this is, some countries could work like this. So nobody knew which particular path of transition can be taken and which country would go. So as one of the examples, what could happen in some transition countries would be this particular some kind of slide. We have the same areas of society. We have an old regime, but instead of coming to a new regime, to free society, we could come to the so-called transitory regime in some countries. I would not mention those names at the moment. Some kind of private prosperity could be low than at the start of transition. That is fact for some of the countries in transition. Instead of free market economy, we could have non-free market economy, but non-free. We can discuss what does it mean. Instead of rule of one party or rule of law, we are having rule of thugs. Instead of communist dictatorship or liberal democracy, we're having either soft or hard authoritarian regime with elements of totalitarian in some countries. Civil society are not developed, and in some places became even more suppressed, even in the last years of communist regime. Instead of peace with neighbors, we could have ethnic conflicts, internal and external wars, confrontation and aggression. Ideology, instead of communist and state-led, and instead of free competition of ideas, we have a chauvinistic ideas, and actually also supported and promoted by the state. And instead of relative low personal safety, we have absence of personal safety if there is a war, if there is external war or internal war. So how can we start and where we would start? In the previous presentation, as well as in literature, you can see that the traditional or very some kind of often used approach to analysis of transition is to put this dichotomy, big bang versus gradual approaches, kind of one very popular from the very beginning. Another one is that also some kind of we all pay tribute to is kind of geographical approach, some kind of Central Europe, some kind of Southeast Europe, former Soviet Union, something like that. And we are trying to analyze this indicator according to this criteria. Another approach is just similar to the previous one, also, who started reforms earlier. Not only who's doing it faster, but who started it earlier, some kind of the timeline of reforms. And also this approach, institutions versus liberalization. There could be some others. What kind of problems we do have when we're dealing with such approaches? We have a lot of exceptions. We have a lot of outliers. And for this sample of countries, of 30 countries, the number is quite substantial. For example, it's quite clear that a number of countries are behaving much better than so-called structural approach would suggest, like Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Albania, Mongolia. On the other hand, such a country like Belarus, that many people would expect very substantial progress, is lagging very much behind. So what can be done about this? I'd like to propose a slightly different approach that is being using partially the approaches that have been taken by others, but looking at this from slightly different perspective. Let's start from the very beginning, when these transitions started. All these transitions started with political revolutions of 89, 91. We can see in these graphs built on Freedom House data how some kind of the substantial jump of these countries in transition, how high they rose within really few years. And we can see quite a big divergence in trajectories among those countries. Here some kind of the groups of countries, but if we look, for example, here, we have interesting approach. There is countries that are coming from different geographical locations. There are a couple of countries from Visegrad Group, Hungary and Poland. There are a couple of countries from Baltic Sea coast, Bulgaria and Romania. One country from Balkans, Albania, and one country is very far from all this region is Mongolia. Nevertheless, if you can look, there are some similarities in this behavior. So that is why it's some kind of demonstration that even the kind of very substantial geographical distance does not prevent countries to behave in a very similar way. On the other hand, if we look into some other countries that are some kind of neighbors or even sometimes were parts of the same previous country like Czechoslovakia, especially Yugoslavia, we can see very substantial divergence of the trajectories. So it looks like those countries did not have anything in common, and because of the last 25 years or so they're behaving very differently. The same can be said also about Russia, about the Soviet Union and countries of the former Soviet Union, and especially Russia as well. So that is why the approach that I try to make here is to use as criteria level of political freedom. Level of political freedom that is being preserved for most of this period of transition from 92 to year 2013, because some kind of just after the these political revolutions of 89, 91. So according to this approach, we are arriving to four very distinct group of countries. One, the first one would be consolidated democracy they will be countries of Central Europe and Baltics, as you can see the list of them, plus Mongolia. And that is very important, that Mongolia became one of the most successful countries in terms of achieving political freedom and sustaining it over a long period of time. Second group is not consolidated, but consolidating democracy. Most of these countries are from Balkans and from Black Sea coast. You can see the list here. Another group is partly free because they're very diverse. So that is why I call them by the kind of first letters of these countries: Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Armenia, and Kyrgyz Republic, which form the group GUMAC. Okay, so just some time ago there was a group like GUM, Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova. Was also Azerbaijan that time, but nevertheless, this is a not political organization. It's a kind of the analytical academic approach to this country. And the last group is very also interesting. Countries that for most of this period of time and on average are non-free politically. And here we have 2 Slavic countries, Belarus and Russia, and 5 Muslim countries. So that is why it's a kind of, because Ukraine could be considered south from both Belarus and Russia, so I call them North Slavic and Muslim. So this is a 4 group of countries. That is why you can see some elements of geography exist here, but mostly this is a political approach of political freedom. So this is a kind of the average for those groups for this period of time, very clear. Free consolidating democracies, partially free for most of this period of time, Balkans, next group, partially free GUMAC countries, which is slightly lower, and non-free North Slavic and Muslim. And if we look into this kind of the trajectory of those countries, they are very clear, very distinct, and easier to follow this, unlike the previous charts. So that is why you can see this is a political freedom in these 4 groups, countries as a percentage of OECD average of this period of time. As we can see, only consolidated democracy moved very close to OECD level, approximate 90% level. All other countries are lagging behind, certainly with different gaps. But what is especially striking that at least from the late 90s, such groups of countries like GUMAC and especially North Slavic and Muslims are going down. So the gaps are not closing, but gaps are widening. So that is why it is even for so-called North Slavic and Muslim countries, the gap today is larger than it was during the communist times, at least before some kind of mid-80s and late 80s. That's a very striking result. Certainly, the leading country in this group is Russia. And just to show you how striking the behavior of this country, that over the last 24 years, it went from the level almost free in 1991 to one of the most non-free countries, which is lower than Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Middle East, the worst regions in the world by political freedom. If we look into some other indicators according to this group, you can see length of recession. Just first of all, just some economic indicators, just to understand this. Length of recessions in years. It's very clear that the political freedom is associated with a shorter length of recession, less of political freedom associated with longer recession. This is a number of years to restore pre-transition level in GDP per capita. It's probably not so clear, but nevertheless, the same some kind of similarity can be seen as well. So for GUMAC countries, just to restore level in GDP per capita that they had in 1989, they need to spend more than 22 years. And this is we understand that statistic is not very good quality, it's far from perfect. Nevertheless, based on these statistics that is available, cumulative losses in GDP per capita during transition, it is measured some kind of as a sum of decline in GDP per capita versus pre-transition level, in GDP per capita, meaning in 1989, over all period of that period until a country reaches the pre-transition level. So as you can see, this is a unbelievable, it's a horrible economic catastrophe in a substantial portion of the territory of those countries. And this is the depth of transition crisis as a percentage of 1989 GDP per capita. As you can see, it's also unbelievable decline, on average 64% decline in GDP at the bottom of the crisis. Some other indicators that also been demonstrated, some here, like EBRD transition index, very clear diversity between these four group of countries. Economic freedom, countries are moving pretty fast towards OECD level. And I would just attract your attention that these two indicators, probably only two clear indicators that demonstrating closing gaps between transition countries and OECD countries. Transition index and economic freedom index. All other indicators that we can see would not demonstrate such a clear picture. This is GDP per capita as a percentage of OECD. It's, in some cases, is kind of only restoring the pre-transition crisis level. In some cases, it's even lower than it was before. Rule of law, this is a World Bank data. Dalibor has shown that already. So that is why since we do not have here numbers for early period before transition, it's probably not very informative. So I tried to find the indicator of law and order from the company ICIG, and we can see here that a very substantial improvement in the early years of transition in the first part of 90s, or maybe overall 90s, but after that either stagnation or even decline in indicators of law and order versus OECD. Corruption perception index. Also, it's rather hard to say that it's a very clear picture. It looks like that more or less gaps are being the same or even increasing, like in North Slavic and Muslim countries. Political terror scale, also compared to 1989. With exception of consolidated democracy situation in Balkans, situation probably became worse than it was before. Homicide rates per 100,000 people of total population. As you can see, OECD is a very low level, so that is why we need to look not to up, but down, the best results. So it's going more or less down, but still a very high level of homicide rate and much higher than it was before transition. Life expectancy at birth, at least we do not see any clear improvement. So another element that is also very important that I'd like to attract your attention, this is an element of security for these transition states. This is a comparison of frequency of the aggressions waged by the USSR or Russia against immediate neighbors per, let's say, such indicator, 100 neighbors per year. The first period is after Second World War until 1991. During the period of the Soviet Union, and the last period from 1991 to year 2014. I'd like to attract your attention to probably two most interesting some kind of facts here. If you look on the right side of this slide, you can see the number of aggressions against non-NATO members, because some neighbors of USSR, Russia were NATO members or non-NATO members. The frequency of attacks of aggression, military aggressions against non-NATO members in new Russia increased roughly by threefold, compared even to the Soviet Union. And another important element, there was no single aggression against a NATO member who would be a neighbor of USSR or Russia, neither in the previous period nor in this period. So one conclusion that being made by political elites and by general public in many in countries neighbors of current Russia, the best way to guarantee to secure peace is to secure some kind of membership in organizations that provide a collective security. All right. Using all these different indicators in different areas, but using all these at the same time, not once, I try to find those countries that happen to succeed in each area and would not some kind of move down from the idealized situation of the OECD on each of these sectors. So that is why the gap between that particular country and OECD average would become, over this period of time, smaller than it was at the beginning of transition. I found 5 countries that improved on all these main areas. They are Estonia, Poland, Mongolia, Albania, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I looked into the countries that failed on each element of the transition. And the 3 countries. Kosovo, Tajikistan, and Russia. The worst case, according to all this, Russia. We can some kind of think about what has been said earlier today. The best country by all indicators is Estonia. What is important to look into these countries? These countries that are success countries, all of them are politically free countries. All of them either consolidated democracy or consolidated democracies. Not all, but 2 of 3 worst cases, Tajikistan and Russia, non-free. Kosovo is partly free at the moment. So that is why it gives us probably one of the most important elements or criteria for success. Freedom overall, and first of all, political freedom. Second element that is also very important is guarantees for security. It's probably not a coincidence that 3 of 5 success countries happen to be member of NATO that provides peace for those countries. It's actually one of the ideas of Adam Smith. What are the components for success of country? Peace. And last, but probably the most important component of success, people at the top of the country, people who know what is freedom, what means freedom, and people who do work for freedom, implement. And there are some very well-known people in economic sphere, in political sphere, in different countries, in Poland, in Kazakhstan, in Georgia, in Slovakia, in Estonia, so in Latvia, those people who really made changes for those countries. Thank you.